Welcome to Conversations from the Edge of Consciousness. I'm your host, Kristine Madera. For me, and possibly for you, the inner world of consciousness has always been much more real and way more fun than the so-called real material world. Growing up, I thought I was alone in this, but I'm not. There are a lot of us, and far too many have no one to talk to who shares this experience. I've been lucky to cultivate a community of friends who love to talk about the energies, ideas, and vibrations that are pushing the edges of our own consciousness, as well as our collective consciousness. In Conversations from the Edge, we share our conversations with you. Welcome to Conversations from the Edge. This is your host, Kristine Madera, and we are back today with Jana Roemer. And Jana Roemer is an astrologer and yoga nidra expert and a yogi who has taken all of her great loves and created astro nidras, which is a lying down meditation where the body relaxes to a deep state while your awareness remains online. And it helps to awaken you to the multitude of transitions that life has to offer and help cure a busy mind. So it's a beautiful practice. And thank you, Jana, for being here. I'm very excited about our conversation today because we're going to talk about Scorpio.
Thank you for having me. And you're a Scorpio, aren't you?
I am. And I have a big cluster of my planets and things in Scorpio. So I've got a lot of Scorpio in me. So I'm always interested in hearing about Scorpio because we have such a bad reputation, but we're all so wonderful. Well, maybe not all. Many of the Scorpios I know are just the best people that I know. So I'm excited to hear about what you have to say about this Scorpio season and Scorpios in general, because it's a really kind of crazy season to be alive.
Isn't it though? My goodness. I have to say, I don't think Scorpios deserve the bad rap that they get.
Thank you.
Yes, I love Scorpio. And here's why. They have depth.
Yes.
Scorpio has depth. When you look into the eyes of a Scorpio, you know they are seeing beyond the surface every single time. And I think that's where the bad rep comes into play, is that to live at that kind of depth can make people uncomfortable.
Well, that's true. Yes.
Yeah. Most of the Scorpios I know feel really deeply. They see really deeply. You cannot lie to a Scorpio. You can trust a Scorpio, usually, like if I came to you knowing that you have a Scorpio, what's called a stellium with all those planets, I would know that as long as we're good, me and you are good, I could trust you with my life.
But if we're not, then watch out.
But if we're not, yeah, exactly. But the thing about Scorpio is if you betray a Scorpio, you're essentially dead to them. So, I have two Scorpio children. My youngest,
that's right. Right.
My youngest, I know I need to, I cannot breach my relationship with him because he is Sun, Moon, Venus, and Mercury all in Scorpio. In
my
house.
Gosh.
Yeah. He's Scorpio.
Okay.
Anyways, I mean, my older one, I can't really mess him up. I don't want to mess up my kids, period.
Sure. Yeah.
But so Scorpio is an archetype. It is where I like to call Scorpio like the drug, sex, and rock and roll. Although that kind of makes it kind of cheapens what it really is, but it is.
It does.
Okay. Yeah. It's alchemical, shamanic depth, psychology, and transformation is what you have in Scorpio. It is often the topics that people don't want to talk about. So we're talking about like mental health. We're talking about death. We're talking about sex. We're talking about addiction. We're talking about any part of life that could be considered the shadow part of life. We're going to find that all in Scorpio. And when we go into the shadow and people get uncomfortable there, you can see why addiction lives in there, right? Because if people don't want to deal with their trauma, Dr. Gabor Mate, although I'm not sure that I 100% agree with this, but he has a pretty strong statement that all addiction is an expression of childhood trauma. And so it's also the domain of abuse, abuses of power and traumatic events. And then the interesting thing though, is that two people could go through the same traumatic event, but one person carries trauma from it and one doesn't. And the question is, well, what's the difference there? Right? Like, why does one person? And it's because what it comes down to, and I think this is where Scorpios really hold the power, is your ability to remain present to whatever life is facing you. And this is why Scorpios get this reputation for being intense, because they don't back down.
No, they really don't. And this is something that I know of the Scorpios that are friends of mine as well, and in my own self, is that one of the reasons that you can hold that stance is because of that depth of Scorpio in feeling connected to things that are deeper than what's going on in the surface. So you don't lose yourself at the surface because you're anchored into something that has more gravity, more heft, and more of an anchor.
It's like your blood. Right? Yeah. That depth is just so necessary. You're bored in the surface conversation.
Well, yes. That's so
obviously
true.
Anybody who's been listening to your podcast knows your depth. We're going places. Scorpio is also associated with the world of the occult. So this could be mediumship, like the psychic realm, or like the world of oracles. Right. And it could also be, I said mediumship, but this could also be like, think about what that is. That's to be able to communicate with the land beyond form, or the realm beyond form, to be able to see the unseen. Right. And so you look at what happens in Scorpio season. We have Halloween. We have, in the Mexican culture, the Day of the Dead. And we put these altars up for those that have died. This is part of Scorpio season. And they say the veil is the thinnest. And so somebody who lives by this, like is born into a Scorpio archetype, their life, the veil is just more thin.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And so you just get access. And that's why you can't lie to a Scorpio, because you can see beyond the surface. Like, and Scorpios, they also, though, can be quite mysterious, because as much as they can see and they understand, they don't often want to be known for that. And so Scorpios have this way of kind of turning the lens back around on somebody else, so they can remain a mystery, because like, who do they trust? Right? Yeah. They know too much. And so they'll keep their lives more of a secret and more hidden, knowing that they just tend to see more than the rest of the population. They understand more. And that's why they make the best friends. They make the best friends. I love my Scorpio friends, because if a Scorpio is your friend, they're your true friend, they are your friend. Like, they've got your back. They're there for you. They're the ones you call from the jail cell. Hopefully we're not doing that often, but you know what I mean? Like, they're the ones when you're in trouble, you're like, hey, I need help right now. And I know that you're going to come, when you're my real friend. So
absolutely.
Yeah. And when we look across the zodiac, I find this to be really interesting. So we look across the zodiac to understand Scorpio archetype more. We're looking at Taurus. Taurus is one of the most loyal signs. Taurus is also very much rooted in the physical world, where Scorpio is very much rooted in the non-physical world. Scorpio is a fixed water sign. They can traverse through all types of water. I just got that image in my head of that movie. There was a movie where it was like a creature. Oh goodness, what is it called?
I was just talking about this movie with a friend of mine as we were swimming in the pool, and I couldn't think of it. She couldn't think of it either. So it must be a block about this movie.
That's so funny. You know the one I'm talking about, though, where she falls in love with this underwater creature.
Yes.
Yeah. Like, I feel like that's very Scorpionic representation, that whole like love triangle there, or love, not triangle, that love, like forbidden, I guess, and being able to live in all the different expressions of water. But then also we have to remember, the Taurus, Scorpio. So Taurus, it's all about understanding your own self-worth. Well, Scorpio is really interesting because it also rules other people's money. So it's like taxes and inheritance and the ability to get investments for your ideas. Scorpios tend to have an easier time getting other people's money, which, whatever you want to look at that. Now, Scorpio lives in the body. Scorpio lives in the sex organs. So like the actual genitalia, in the sexual fluids. So menstrual blood and semen and lubrication and all of that stuff. That's all Scorpio. Scorpio also lives, and this is, I think, super interesting, lives in the cerebral spinal fluid.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. And when we look at the cerebral spinal fluid, when somebody has a mystical experience, cerebral spinal fluid moves up the spine, and it actually creates almost like an engorgement around the pineal and pituitary gland. There's the way that the casing of the cerebral spinal fluid, as it goes up the spine and it goes into the brain, it actually, and I'm going to just talk in Scorpio language here. Okay. The pathway, it actually looks like a clitoris all the way around the pineal and pituitary gland. And when the cerebral spinal fluid goes up the spine in a mystical experience, it engorges that area and it squeezes and milks the pineal gland, and it releases it. As you get through the mystical experiences, what happens is the pineal gland releases a chemical called DMT, which is known as the spirit chemical that we have released at death and birth. And perhaps people have a greater understanding of it through shamanic ceremony, like plant medicine. But Scorpio has the ability, by moving the cerebral spinal fluid up the spine, and of course there's got to be all kinds of circumstances that bring you there, to have this mystical experience where you can then meet God. And if we look at sacred sexuality as a practice, that's essentially the whole idea, is that through lovemaking, you move into this mystical experience where your partner is the place where you come to meet God. And this is all in the realm of Scorpio. I just think it's amazing. I mean, who doesn't want that?
That's right. Amen.
Yeah. So then it's like the orgasmic experience as well. Although if we wanted, we could actually do like a whole podcast on just sex and the zodiac alone, because it's in many places. So if you don't have a lot of Scorpio in your chart, don't worry. You can still find your way through your sexuality. But Scorpio is really the home of that. So, one thing that I didn't mention in the previous podcast with Libra season, but if you're paying attention to the astrology, you would have learned, is that although Libra season starts with all the planets retrograde, by the end of Libra season, or I should say the start of Scorpio season, we have way more planets have stationed direct. So we have Scorpio season begins on Friday, October 22nd, and Mercury is the last planet that stations direct on the 18th. And so Pluto, then Saturn, then Mercury, they all station direct. And so by the time we get to Scorpio season, we had all this Mars activity in Libra season, this like weighing out the scales and of justice and having a look and bringing in more information and all of that stuff. Heightening your integrity, that black moon Lilith, that's like some of the stuff that's been repressed is coming out, right? All of that. But now we're in Scorpio season, all planets are direct, and Scorpio is ruled by Mars and Pluto. And so now we are in deep transformative times. Things are changing now that we're in Scorpio season, which is so great, because I think if one thing that the majority of the population could agree on is we want things to change, right?
Yeah. I think everybody wants it to change in different ways.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. That's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, so what happens shortly after we get into Scorpio season is that Mars goes into Scorpio as well. And we haven't seen Mars in its own sign since the end of 2020, when we had Mars in Aries, because Mars rules both Aries and Scorpio. And it was retrograde, and it was in Aries for 6 months. And during that time, the second half of 2020, that's when we saw the beginning of all these different protests and lots of different measures coming in, and the world started getting really weird. You know, we were 6 months into the pandemic at that point, and things started to get really weird. Now we have Mars on the 30th of October coming back into Scorpio, coming back into one of its own signs. And I think things are going to be a little hot. Like, we're going to see things heating up a little bit. And I don't say that to create any kind of fear or apprehension, but just to say, like, okay, like, get ready. I look at Scorpio season as I want to be a part of the change. Like, how do I want to participate in the change? Right. And when we look at some of the aspects that are going on, we also have the new moon in Scorpio on the 4th of November. And on the new moon in Scorpio, we have the sun opposite Uranus. And so this new moon in Scorpio, first of all, it is always one of the most emotional, transformative moons. It is one of revelation. It's one where we say, oh my God, I did not see it from that perspective. I can't unsee it now that I see it. I'm different. I feel different. I walk different. My relations are turning different. And because we have sun opposite Uranus, it's like something unexpected.
Wow.
Something unexpected.
Like every 10 minutes for 2 years now. But
I think it's getting faster though.
It is getting faster. And I think one of the key things here, I mean, if you want to really approach this from a Scorpio standpoint, is again, in all of this heat of change, is instead of being swept away by what's happening at the surface and all the things that are trying to pull you in different ways for different reasons at the surface. And oftentimes we have, our own conflicting ideas at the surface of what we want, is to drop down deeper, go into that heart, go into the water, go into that flow, and, find the direction of movement you want to go to and flow in that direction, as opposed to, switching to the side or to the issue or to, the aspect right at the surface, because you can be on one side of one argument and then on other sides of other arguments that kind of pull you in different directions if you're at the surface. But if you have that sense of, this is the world that I'm committed to creating, and you just stay that course, then that surface stuff doesn't use your energy for its own ends. You're using your energy to create what it is that you want by staying on that deeper level. So just as a Scorpio, to all the Scorpio wannabes out there, how to surface.
Scorpio wannabes. Well, it's really interesting that you say that, because one of the themes that I'm seeing, again, I always love to pan out. Like, we can look at the minutia or the details, but we can also pan out. One of the bigger themes that I see in the astrology is the loss of spirituality, or the loss of faith, when we get too caught up in like, follow the science, or this is the right. So we have what we need. Some of the medicine that we need is this restoration of our sense of spirituality. Like, what is God to you? Who is God to you? And we get more into that in Sagittarius season, but Scorpio season is like, wait a second. There are invisible forces at play. There are invisible forces at play. What are these bigger invisible forces? And we cannot know everything. The mystery is very much alive. And how can I surrender to the mystery and understanding that I can't know it all? What is happening is so much bigger than our ego, Mars, than our ego's ability to comprehend. And if the ego can actually bow to the mystery, we will move into a greater understanding, but we have to get out of our own way in order to do that. And I think, like, every Scorpio that I know, when they find that they're fighting with themselves, when they're wrestling with themselves, when they're, in the pit of their own darkness, it's the ego that is causing a ruckus. And when they finally are like, okay, like, there is something bigger. What is the unknown? What's the mystery? How can I surrender to this? That's when all of a sudden the grip lessens, like you finally get some reprieve. And so like, that's a big piece of the Scorpio season, is to bring back our relationship with the invisible forces.
Absolutely. Because, our ego, it always gets a bad rap, but it's really kind of our cognition. It's all the models that we have learned to live by, and all of our thoughts and emotional models that fit within these models. It's just kind of our concept of how we live. But we can't, in this kind of times of change, where all the models that we've had are collapsing. You can't take an old model and try to fit it back into this new place. And since all of our cognition is based on things that we've already learned, you can't do this cognitively. You actually have to surrender to that idea that, one, I can't know everything. And two, everything that I know is part of what's collapsing. And three, how do I find that faith in myself and that faith in the unknown to trust that as I'm moving forward, even though I don't know, I'm protected. I am, there's a state of grace that's carried me forward, that larger part of me that's non-cognitive, because we have, we tend to think of our cognitive self as ourself, but we've got this huge experience of us, our energetic selves, our, higher selves, whatever you want to call it, our soul self, whatever you want to call it, that does have that larger perspective, that is kind of running the show. But, and for me, like, it was a hard thing. It's been a hard struggle for, decades, really, to surrender to the cognition to that and allow that to be the guiding force. Because right now, like, that's what we need. But we just don't have any alternatives.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mean, do we even have a clue what's going on? That's what I keep coming back to.
I don't think so. No.
Every time somebody wants to argue with me, I'm just like, we have no idea.
Right.
Like, I can sit and listen to every different side of the story, and everybody is so sure their side of the story is the right side of the story, that they're on the right side of history or whatever it is. But like, when you actually listen to all the different sides and you see the surety in everybody's different side, it's just like, we have no clue. We have no clue. And that's like Scorpio season in a nutshell right there. It's just to be like,
and it's stressful to try to hold on to that control mechanism. From a physiological standpoint, if you let go and you surrender, you keep all your energy. If you're fighting about it and you're trying to own your control and, own your story and make everybody else believe in it, then you're just using up your energy for basically nothing, really, except for the expression of the ego and the cognitive self. So, it's been a long struggle, but I've really tried to, let go of that and conserve energy by being in surrender as much as possible. And it's not always easy.
Yeah. Well, okay. So remember in Libra season, when we talked about how the progression of the air signs with Gemini, Libra, and then Aquarius. So we can do that with Scorpio as well, with the water signs. So the first time we see the water sign is in Cancer season. And it's like, how do I need to be protected and loved? And how do I need to be mothered? Right. So it's very much about me and making sure that I feel safe in order to be vulnerable. When we go into Scorpio, you don't have a mom anymore. Mom stays in Cancer season, right? Like, mom's there, you're on your own. Like, when somebody goes in to do their shadow work or goes in to do their deep psychological work, or when, like, we die alone, right? When we go from marriage to divorce, we're going from partnership to aloneness, it is to go and do your shadow work. That is a lonely path. That is a path of solitude, right? And from that, we gain our sovereignty. Like, I don't know anybody that's gone through a dark night of the soul and still feels weak off the other end. Oftentimes you come out of that and you're empowered. You believe in yourself. You trust yourself. You understand your capability. Like, even giving birth, I would put birth, even though it often gets put into Cancer season with mom, I think birth lives in Scorpio season very much, because it's like a little death and a rebirth, and Scorpio season is rebirth. Aside from the fact that you can have C-sections, but like, if we look at the design of birth, that is between that mom and that baby. Like, she's got to go through that. She's got to do that on her own. And it becomes this source of deep empowerment and self-trust. And then the final water is in Pisces, and Pisces, we're actually merging back to source. And so I think that what happens is, first, our mom is our God, like, mom is everything, our universe. It's like everything defaults back to mom. The baby's like going to mom for safety at the breast, it's mom. Then it's like, okay, mom's a human. I got to do this on my own. And in that, we often fall to our needs, and we find God in the Scorpio. We find the invisible. And then when we get to Pisces, which is the third expression of water, it's like, okay, I can surrender into the arms of spirit. I can merge back to source. And it is actually, although we face death in Scorpio, we actually die in Pisces. when you merge back to that source from which you came. And so
Wow.
like looking at the water signs, there's so much depth in the water signs. It's so beautiful. I love the water signs.
I mean, okay. Most of me is water, so I dig flow with the water. Okay. Yes. What's next in Scorpio season?
Okay. So I was talking about the new moon being pretty unexpected on the 4th. And then what's interesting is the very next day on the 5th, we have both Venus and Mercury changing signs. So Venus moves into Capricorn, which we'll get into not in this episode.
Okay.
Because Venus is going to retrograde in Capricorn at the end of this year.
Okay.
So this is important to remember. Now, Venus in Capricorn, it actually doesn't really love Capricorn. I'm just going to say it. So Venus is our relations, our love, it's romance. It is a place where we understand the feminine and our harmony points and our prosperity. Okay. Now on the prosperity point, Venus loves being in Capricorn because it is going to build. Capricorn is all about building. It's the CEO, it's the boss energy, it's the visionary, right? So that side, Venus in Capricorn, amazing time to figure out how to make money. Not so amazing for like the lovey, warm and fuzzies in your relationships, because it's very, although it's feminine, Capricorn is a feminine sign. The way Capricorn is actually going through its own metamorphosis. It's going through its own destruction. Pluto is in Capricorn right now, destroying the systems and structures of Capricorn. But the old Capricorn system and structure is very masculine in nature. But what we're birthing ourselves into is a greater understanding of the depth of the feminine nature of Mother Earth, the depth of receptivity that is possible when you are a listener to your soul's mission, your dharma, your purpose. And so when Venus is in Capricorn, it is going to be about dismantling some of these old patriarchal structures, or, you know, we can call it whatever you want to call it, but I'm going to give it a word, the toxic structures of abuse that have been playing and the way that we have internalized them. And so Venus moves into Capricorn. Like I said, we can get into that way more into the future, but that's a little teaser. And that is going to be a long process. So that's November 5th. And we're going to see December is when the retrograde happens and into January. So it's a bit of a journey. But then we have Mercury in Scorpio. So we're just building more Scorpio energy, of course, which is awesome. I say that with such a nice little giggle, because then on November 10th, and I think November 10th, and, you know, the week around November 10th. So let's say the second week of November is going to be intense. We have Mars square Saturn, which again, we haven't seen since the end of 2020 when things started to get really weird. Mars is in Scorpio and Saturn is in Aquarius. It's like individual will against the societal will. And also at the same time, Mars and Mercury are conjunct in Scorpio, and Mercury is also squaring Saturn. So I think this has a little bit of fight energy around it. This is a battle. I think we're like second week of November. I'm not saying, you know, it's got fight energy. It's a little bit punchy. I think it will be interesting to see what happens. And then in that same week, we have the Sun trine Neptune, which is like maybe helping us reveal some of the stories and the lies that have been told. And then Mercury opposite Uranus, a little bit of awakening through this messaging. And I think that November is going to there's going to be, maybe I'll say revelations or awakenings through conflict.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
So this is why Scorpio has its reputation, right?
Well, if we look at it from a Mars perspective, yeah, you don't back down. That's the thing.
No, I know.
One thing that a mature Scorpio is really masterful at is choosing their battles.
Yeah.
And if we took that as our little in our medicine pouch, right? Because that Scorpio shamanic energy there. If we like chose our battles and decided like, okay, I'm going to be mysterious on this, and I'm going to choose to go down on this. This is the hill I'm willing to die on, right? Like, what is it for you? And looking at that. And then we have a Taurus full moon on the 19th of November.
Ooh,
and around
on
your birthday. Amazing. Well, right around that energy, we have Mercury trine Neptune, which again is these stories or the lies or the media. I feel like the media, we're going to see some things. I'm not sure though, because the media is don't like the media very much. But we have these squares. We have Venus square Chiron, which is like bringing up our own personal pains, our wounds. We have Mercury square Jupiter. So some of those messages just, it's hard for me to say, because when I look at this, I see favorable energy for moving lies into the revelation of lies, I guess. Right. Moving into the shared consciousness. But then I also see a little bit of a collapse. And so like this, I could see the media getting really messy. I could see like media wars in November. I don't like November very much personally. Like, I don't like the astrology. I'm going to make sure that I'm not watching the news. So, and then we move into Sagittarius season 2 days after that full moon.
Sounds like it's going to be a really busy month.
Well, I mean, when we move into Sagittarius season, we're also moving towards the third and final Saturn Uranus square, which I mean, as a little bit of a foreshadowing that happens at the end of December. Then we also have Jupiter moving into Pisces at the end of November, which Jupiter into Pisces, good news. Love that. Saturn square Uranus, the last time we saw that was the snowstorms in Texas in summertime and the power outages, you know? So it's very, very unpredictable. We're moving into increasingly unpredictable times, and destabilizing times. And so I think, you know, if we look at the work, you know, in when we talked in Libra season, I said, you know, just getting yourself prepared for the winter. Like, get yourself prepared for the winter, guys. Like, let's do this. Let's get ourselves prepared for the winter. Think from like a homesteading point of view. And, you know, I haven't even talked about money. I could have talked about money so much in the astrology. I'm concerned about things like inflation. I'm concerned about resource accessibility. And I don't know exactly what that looks like. I think that with the different ways that we're seeing the destabilization of the economy or the workforce or government, you know, there's a lot of different places that we're seeing destabilization. I just think if you are so blessed to be able to have a nice full pantry, I would do it. You know, if you are so blessed, you know, you're going to buy something, maybe get it before inflation hits, you know, like
there's already, you know, constant disruptions in supply chains. And so, you know, you walk through the grocery store and you've got different parts of different shelves that are bare, or you've got things that you used to be able to count on that there's something else there now because, you know, the brand or the kind of food or whatever it happened to be just isn't available for whatever reason. And there was something my husband was just talking about at the VA where he volunteers, that they were having trouble getting eyeglasses because the components that put together the eyeglasses and the supply chains weren't available. And so it's strange because one little thing, like even I know that Pfizer was talking about their vaccine, and I'm just using this as an example. One of the arguments about why you couldn't just go generic with a vaccine like that was because there was like 287 different component parts that went into creating and delivering that vaccine, and any one of those would pull out the whole chain. And any product that you think about is going to have, especially if it's a complex project like a product like a car or, you know, a electronic component or something, chances are the pieces are built in different countries and then shipped to a whole different country to be constructed and then shipped to the end marketed country. And so you've got all of these different things. And if one piece of that little puzzle is going to be, you know, unavailable, the whole chain collapses. Oh, I know a lot of the astrology, or at least what I've heard of with us moving forward with everything collapsing, is that things move more local. So now might be a good time to see what's available that is, your local farmers, if you have access to that, like what's available locally that you can source that maybe you can look to, your neighborhood or your region, as opposed to something that would have a global manufacturing supply chain, and begin to get really local with your stuff. Because there's a lot of things that you can get, like the basics in life, your food, soap and toilet paper and all that you can get through local sources rather than having to go through these things that are shipped across the country or across the world.
Yep. You really nailed it. That is my number one thing right now when we're looking at money and community and supply chain is go local as much as possible. Yeah. And I think when we're looking at some of the bigger cycles again to pan out, to go outside of system, like I actually think it's really interesting the way that people are being forced out of system, maybe kicking and screaming because of the choices that they're making. But actually, I think they might end up being better off in the long run because they're getting more prepared earlier than when, let's say, all of a sudden, if supply chain is cut off on something so standard in your life, then you have to adjust, right? If we look at some of these mandates and the volume of people who are choosing to quit their job rather than get the vaccine, how is that going to pan out in the long run? Like how is that going to disrupt the way that we have access to services and supplies? We don't know. Like, it's so unpredictable. We don't know what people are going to do. Are people going to take it like Biden's announcement of every company over 100 people have to be vaccinated now? Just for a moment, spend some time in your imagination of like what kind of companies have over 100 staff, what they supply to the American the American public. And if that's disrupted, then what's the fallout of that? And like in Canada, we already have such a massive nursing shortage. Yeah, and we have nurses and we have nurses that are like, I'm not taking it. I'm going to quit, or nurses that are close to retirement that are like, I'm going to retire. Yeah. Because I just can't anymore. Or, the burnout, like we're at this very unpredictable place. And the more that we try to control it, the more it's going to fall apart. And like, just forget about the world in your life. Everybody knows this. This is so scorpionic, by the way. Like everybody knows the more you try to control something, the more uncontrollable it becomes. Yeah. Right. And so just look at that in your own life and have your opinion, like want to control, not control, thinking it's better for everybody to comply or not. Like I want to be as neutral as possible as an astrologer to this. Like to just say, the more we try to control anything, the less controllable it becomes. Well, is something for us to yield to.
Absolutely. And I've got I always like to relate. Well, not always. I often like to relate to how things work in the body and how systems then grow from there as an example or a metaphor. And like with control, like when you're trying to control yourself, or even more, when you're trying to control your family or your boss or other people, or you're trying to control a situation, when you think about the outlay of your personal energy that you need to exert to try to control, it's a huge outlay. It's an enormous stress on the body, and it breaks down the body's structural integrity and resource integrity over time. So you can extrapolate out from there, like these big systems that are falling apart now, all of the energy, the money, the resources they're exerting to try to maintain control, and that ultimately it's unsustainable, and those things fracture. And in a body, that's where we tend to get to a chronic disease, or we've got an acute illness or something that happens that forces us to turn back and kind of let go of control and come back in and start re-nurturing our own bodies. And when you're trying to control things, or you're giving your energy to whatever it is that's trying to control out there in the world, it's a system that can't stand, because basically taxes everything, not just in a financial way, but in everything, to try to maintain a system or a state that's basically unmaintainable without all of this huge excess. And so it will crumble, it will fall. And so just take a look at like how you're using your personal energy and where you're using it to control, come back into yourself, because you can't control it. And it's pointless to try. It's as tempting as it is, but that being in that place of nurturing yourself and just trusting the process as you move through it without over involving yourself in the energy pulls of the surface can be just an enormous way to really take care of yourself in this time, because this is not ending anytime real soon. This is a long marathon. This is not a short sprint.
Yeah. You just nailed it with that. Everything you just said, just nailed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you. That's always fun talking with you. And do you have any last little things you wanted to say about Scorpio or anything else before we sign off?
Don't be afraid of Scorpio season. Don't be afraid of the power of Scorpio. Yeah, I love this conversation with you today. Thank you so much for having me again. It's just so amazing speaking with you every time. Little light bulbs switch on.
Well, and vice versa. I really enjoy our conversation. So you can find all of Jana's information and her links and her website and her programs at conversationsfromtheedge.net or on the show notes, depending on where you're listening to this. And so, Jana, it's been really wonderful talking with you again. I can't wait for our next conversation to hear what's next in our personal and collective stories.
Thank you so much for having me yet again. Thank you.
This is your host, Kristine Madera. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation from the edge of consciousness. You can find all our conversations at conversationsfromtheedge.net. You'll also find links to schedule a private conversation with me or any of my friends, as well as tools to help you expand your own consciousness and explore what's possible for you outside the boundaries of your current perceptions. Feel free to use this podcast to start your own conversation by sharing it with friends, on social media, in your blog, or even in your own podcast. And as always, live the adventure of pushing your own edge. It's the most amazing adventure there is.